This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by Isotope, Atom Audio, Native Instruments, Lewitt, Spectra 1964, and OWC. You're hearing my voice right now on the Lewitt Pure Tube microphone through the Spectra 1964 STX 100D mic pre and C610 complementer mixed with Isotope RX, Ozone, Neutron, and Nectar, all recorded safely onto an OWC SSD and mixed on Atom Audio monitors. Please check out our awesome sponsors using the link in the show notes. It's a great way for you to help support this show. Now get ready to rock.
Smaller rooms are terrible. The bigger the room, the better, generally, I've found. And then a big room with this slanted ceiling is just cool because in my head, at least, the sound is going out the back of the speakers. If it's going up, it's hitting there and bouncing over my head. And I don't even really need diffusers at the back wall because there's another slanted one that redirects it to the floor. It's kind of I do what I can. I put some stuff up, and then I'm making stuff that I think sounds good, so I'm kind of good with it.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lij Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Atom Audio can provide all your monitor needs, whether you're setting up a first-time home studio for recording music or podcasts, or a world-class full-size studio for professional mixing and mastering in stereo or immersive sound. Featuring the XART tweeter and custom DSP onboard processing, the A-series monitors will perfectly adapt to your studio. Get the Atom Audio monitors and subwoofers that are right for you with an extended 5-year warranty at atomaudio.com. Hey Rockstars, have you checked out Native Instruments recently? Look, no matter what style of music you make, Native Instruments gives your studio everything you need, from drums, loops, and beats to the coolest synths, realistic strings, guitar amps, and futuristic synth pads. I personally love recording and tracking real bands in my studio, but then also adding awesome overdubs from Battery, Contact, Massive X, Super 8, Guitar Rig, and Hybrid Keys, for example. Go pick up Complete Start for free today with a bundle of 2,000 sounds and 6 gigs of samples over at nativeinstruments.com and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off. Some restrictions apply. Howdy Rockstars, it's your host Lij Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Joe Gilder, a musician and entrepreneur from Franklin, Tennessee. As a musician, he's released a number of albums and EPs of his own music. As an entrepreneur, he founded Home Studio Corner in 2009, where he creates free content and paid courses to help musicians learn how to produce their own music at home. That's what I like to do. That's what you like to do, rock stars. These days, Joe creates content for Home Studio Corner, The Recording Revolution, and PreSonus and Fender. Joe's been a guest on the show way back originally on episode RSR003, wow, and RSR108. So please check out those episodes to hear his background story. And when we talked about producing, I believe it was 4 EPs in a year. Pretty impressive. Today, we're going to talk about making killer records with his band Staredown and see what we can learn about writing, creating, mixing, and mastering your next best record ever. So please welcome back Joe Gilder to Recording Studio Rockstars. Joe, my man.
Hey, dude. It's good to be back.
Are you ready to rock?
So ready.
Dude, it's great to have you back on the show. And Rockstars, for full transparency, we were laughing because I thought we had been on the show twice, but Google was only showing me episode 3, and I was like, really? It's been that long? And then Joe is a better Googler than I, so he reminded me that we had episode 108.
Google hates me, but then if I searched your site, I showed up. So
there you go. There you go.
Google, man.
I guess maybe I should look at my own website sometimes. So, Joe, yeah, last time you were here, we talked about putting out 4. It's funny. I think you called it 4 EPs in a year, or did you call it 4 records in a year? I mean, to me, anything that's more than one song is a record.
Yeah, it was technically EPs, but yeah. The goal was 4 and I did 3. So that felt okay. Yeah,
that was awesome. And we talked about some cool things like you writing 50 songs so that you could do the 80-20 rule and keep 10 of them, I think, or something like that, right? Yeah. Cool stuff. Have you been now you've got a new record out that you shared with me that just blew my socks off. Nice. And I don't even wear socks.
You don't.
So, and Staredown, is that sort of like a new band name for you? Were you going under your own name and now you've got a band name?
Yeah, well, it's just me and 2 other guys, Tim Horsley on drums and Joel Bazaire on bass. And they've played on just about everything I've put out. But it's always been, I would write the songs and then bring them into play. And this was different because we wrote them all together like a proper band. So, since we did it that way, it made sense to kind of put this as a separate entity. So that's how.
Yeah, it's kind of fun doing the band thing, the band name.
Yeah, it all started with during COVID with the Beatles documentary on Disney Plus.
Yeah,
where they did
Get Back.
Get Back, which was just sucked me in, and I just being in the studio, and they were complete like morons and goofballs most of the time, which I loved. It stirred an itch in me to just get in a room with other people and create.
It's sort of brilliant in a way that they released that movie when they were like, we're pretty sure everybody's going to spend more time watching TV right now, and they'll put up with a 3-hour episode with no plot.
0 plot. I still wasn't sure what was happening, but I liked it.
What would happen if we put out a movie of us just fighting and arguing about stuff and deciding whether or not we're going to get coffee?
And just slap Peter Jackson's name on it, and you're good to go. It's a pretty good formula. It
looked great. I remember that. The colors and the way they sort of digitally remastered it all was pretty remarkable looking.
Yeah.
I did not make it through the 3rd episode, so I still haven't seen them play on the roof.
That was the one thing that like we've all seen. So
yeah,
I don't think you missed much. It's pretty funny though. Like the cops are standing at the door telling them to stop, and they're just looking at them and just keep playing. It was pretty great.
Well, actually, I did that, and I was I was reminded of something I did back in 2010, and I found the video on YouTube and showed it to my kid the other day, and it was I had joined. There was an invitation put out, and then I said I want to do that, and it was at a time in my life where I was like, I need to start getting out of my comfort zone and doing something different. So I signed up for a flash mob back when flash mobs were still a thing. And we all showed up. We descended on 5 Points in East Nashville at Halloween and did an impromptu flash mob coordinated dance of Thriller. So I was dressed up as a zombie doing the Thriller dance. And you got to understand, when I talk about getting out of my comfort zone to go dancing, it's like I'm really out of my comfort zone,
And that was in your bearded days too, huh?
No, it was before.
Was it?
All that, yeah.
Dang.
I didn't rock the long old man beard until about 2015. That's when I started doing that.
All right.
Good 5+ years. I guess it was about 5 years I did that. So let's talk about you, Joe, because this is actually, I'm not a guest on my own show at this point, but
that's fine.
I like to pretend that I am on TV. So Staredown sounds killer, man. This record sounds so good. I was really blown away. We went to lunch, and then you were like, oh, here it is. And I listened to it in the car, and I was like, wow. So where do you want to begin talking about this particular record?
So if
same
somebody
musicians.
So if somebody listening wants to go find it, there is another much heavier band, I think, called Staredown. So look for the album that has pictures of feet.
Nice.
Shoes specifically. So the story, shoegazers. Yeah. The story behind it is years ago. So the band and I, they grew up on comic books. So we go see all the Marvel movies together for, since many dozens of Marvel movies would go. But we'd usually get together for beers before and then go watch the movie. And we were texting about meeting up, and the drummer, Tim, accidentally texted a picture of his feet, which is just a classic old dude move.
Yeah.
And so we made fun of him and texted the pictures of our feet back. And then somebody cropped them together into an album cover, and we made a joke.
And that's it. Those are the text photos right there.
That's it, from the text. And we were like, we should have a band called Staredown, and it was a joke for probably 5 years, and then we finally did it. But yeah, that's the origin story for our comic book.
You know, it's pretty good. I've been reading this book that's sort of like instructing you how to do YouTube properly, and they're talking about thumbnails and the rule of thirds. And I'm looking at your photo, and it's like, yeah, the feet are right in the thirds areas of the image. Well done.
Yes.
You know,
Thank you. We put a lot of thought into that.
Yeah. So these are the same guys that you'd played with before, but on this particular record, you guys are doing it's really powerful music. You know, it really sounds like a great rock band. And I was particularly impressed with your singing on this. Now, that's you singing on all the songs? Yeah, man, you really stepped out and did something, you know, something chancy, you know? I mean, it reminds me, you sound like Chris Cornell. You know, you sound, yeah,
all right.
It's some good
I'll
stuff,
take it.
Dude.
Get your
it's some
ears checked,
soulful singing. Tell us a little bit about that, about pushing yourself to go into that kind of vocal space.
Well, it was. So when we first met, we were all kind of like, let's just meet and jam, and if something happens, something happens. And we started to come up with some ideas, and what was the fear was, I was afraid I would come in with ideas and they would just play what I came up with, you know, because we'd never written together. And if you've ever written with other people, sometimes it's great, sometimes it's terrible, and we had no clue. But it ended up being this really like purely collaborative thing where one week Tim would come in and he'd bought this little Pittsburgh modular synthesizers. Have you seen them? They make these little...
but I was going to ask you about the cool synths that you put on this.
The synths on there, at least the main ones that you hear at the beginning of a couple songs, it's this little like handheld modular synth that you it comes with like the cables and the patches, and you patch things together and mess with oscillators, all that stuff, right? But he had come up with this cool chord progression and this cool kind of very musish sort of arpeggiator thing. And so that was the core idea for a song that he came in with, and then we kind of mapped it out. But he kind of had a melody. That's that first song, Onward, on the record.
And it's got like 9/8 groove or something going on there. You guys have some weird time stuff going on. I was like, man, Joe's cool. These guys are... I can't. I'm going. It is one of those songs where I'm listening in the car and I'm like, it's grooving, and then I'm like, ooh, what time is that? And then I'm like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Oh wait, you know,
I lost count. Yeah, but Tim came in with this melody and lyric too, and it was a lot higher than I'm used to singing. Yeah, and that's part of it. It just worked. It made sense, and we kept it in that key. And I just, you know, clenched and tried to get the notes out. Clenched. Because I remember when I was in college,
I grabbed the vice from the basement where we were practicing.
Nothing works like tweezers in the pocket. But in college, I remember I couldn't sing falsetto for some reason. Like my voice would crack. I couldn't do it. And it was like everybody was writing these sweet love songs and singing falsetto, and the girls would swoon, and I'd be like, I can't do it. So I don't know if it's age or what, but now I can do it. So we were like, let's just lean into it and make him sound like a girl.
I love it, man. Have you considered, so Rockstars, if you're not familiar with Joe has created thousands of YouTube videos, I think at this point, right? So you're a masterful at creating videos to explain how to do stuff in the studio. And we'll get into that on this interview. But have you considered one that is about like how to sing in falsetto, where everything you say in the whole interview is in falsetto voice? That would be great on the video.
You know what? That'd be a good one to write down in the April Fool's idea file.
Yeah. do the whole video in falsetto, but then when you actually sing, Sing like, like, remember Crash
Johnny
Test
Cash?
Dummies?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
It was like, it does. She had birthmarks all over her body.
And the
Yeah.
such a good song.
That's it. You got the range, dude. You got the range.
That song sounds like they played it in slow motion. I can't imagine that's how he really sings. Anyway.
Yeah, you got the voice, dude. So, and I'm sure we've talked about this before, but let's do a little recap. You had a sort of a background in choir and choral singing too. So did that really help you? Like, let's talk about that for just a moment.
Yeah.
Let's talk about what tips and advice you might have for people who are like, I really want to expand my ability to sing. I can hear it. There's that whole concept of our ear is far more advanced than our ability to create the things that we want to hear. So for those of us who might hear the singing that we might want to do, what have you learned about being able to push it? And do you also push yourself? Do you expand your own vocal range before making a record or before singing, or do you just kind of stay in a zone that's already comfortable?
That's a good question. So this last one was definitely stepping out of the comfort zone. Because you can sing it once, like the scratch tracks for that vocal with the falsetto were like, that's cool. I'll when I get to the final version, it'll be fine. But it was challenge. It's like a lot of times I'll sing something that's comfortable for me, and I'll have 4 or 5 takes that all sound fine. But this was like, I sure hope I get one. If I can get like that's the one phrase at the beginning of the song, it took me forever to get one that sounded like I wanted.
Yeah. Can't wait for the live show, huh?
That's one of many reasons why I don't think we'll ever play live, but maybe. But as far as like singing, I grew up in church, singing in like the church choir. My mom was the piano player. My dad sang bass in the choir. And then when I went to college at MTSU, I minored in music, which meant voice lessons with a voice teacher and I was in like Magic Flute, the opera, and was in the big choirs, and then like the smaller traveling a cappella choir and stuff like that. And
you were doing all that at MTSU too?
Yeah.
I forgot that we went to the same college.
That's right.
When were you there again?
Graduated 2006.
Oh, okay. So after me. Okay. Yeah.
Just barely.
I set the precedent for him. Glad you improved on it.
I was like, where did Lidge go? I'm going there. And so I would say as far as like what that taught me, because I don't sing like that, right? Like the proper, operatic choir thing. But I think if it was a big takeaway, it would be getting the vowel sounds right. Because when your vowels are weird shaped, if that makes sense, you can't get the tone you want. You can't project it like you want to. Yeah. So a lot of like if I say the word that first song we're talking about, the first line is I try so hard. And if I go like har, like a pirate, and I get to the R too soon, it's hard to sing that, right?
Yeah.
Har, like your tongue's all in the way. But if I say hard and put the R right at the end, it sounds dumb in spoken word, but it works in singing. And I remember my voice teacher would harp on me because I was just a kid trying to be like a singer-songwriter. And he'd like, man, you're throwing way too many vowels. You're getting to the consonants too early. You're throwing the R's in there. It needs to be just a brief little thing and mostly vowel sounds. And so I think
pirates don't like vowels, is what
pirates,
you're saying.
Yeah, and they're the worst voice students, but they pay well. So,
but then they take it back when they leave.
Exactly.
All right, let's hear. Can you? And so, would it be hard to sing the word audio, for example? That's got a lot of vowels in it all at once.
Yeah, audio. Yes, audio. That's why I don't write songs with the word audio.
That's my standing rule. Wordle, by the way. It has to be.
That's a good one. I think that was mine for a while.
I don't know if it's all that good, but it has to be. I mean, this is what I do. I have to start with audio every time.
My 12-year-old starts with farts.
Oh, that's smart.
It's never going to work, but he was insistent.
Well, it's plural too, but I mean, it's all right. My studio is proudly powered by OWC, and I love how it's improved my workflow. OWC can connect all your audio work drives, trackballs, mix controllers, MIDI keyboards, audio interfaces, displays, or cameras so that you can work fast and focus on making your best record ever. Go look at the Mini Stack STX, Thunderbay 4, or Gemini Thunderbolt 3 dock at maxsales.com/rockstars to find the perfect perfect solution for your studio from OWC. And thanks for using our custom link in the show notes. Howdy, rock stars. I've got a secret to tell you about how I get a consistent sound mixing over 1,000 hours of recording studio rock stars. My secret is using iZotope, RX, Ozone, Neutron, and Nectar to make this podcast sound great. Right now, you're hearing RX breath control, declick, declip, DS, deplosive, voice denoise, Ozone multiband compression, Neutron EQ, and limiting, all from iZotope. Go to iZotope.com and use the secret code ROCK10 to get 10% off. Okay, so now I have played around with finding, vocal warm-up videos online. There's a great 5-minute vocal warm-up where the guy's like, now it's time to roll the R's, and he does all this thing. And it's kind of great, In fact, a client that I work with, I gave it to him and he warms up with it every time now and he sings great in the studio. Do you find that there are some smart ways to warm up for vocals in the studio, or like what's been your take on that?
I'm sure there are, but I don't do them. I warm up by singing the song. Yeah. Setting levels, getting if I need reverb or whatever. That's usually my warm up. Cause it's kind of the same. So I do music at my church most Sundays. And so we usually rehearse right before. So rehearsal is the time to get all the squeaks out and warm up and then sing. I know it's bad form. You should do all the stupid things that make you feel like a moron. But, and I got nothing against them. I just personally have never done it. But I'm also, I feel like I'm not singing stuff that's super challenging, if that makes sense. Like I'm not trying to hold out these big long notes like a
and plus you're singing often, so maybe you are kind of naturally already warmed up. Did something,
and I talk all the time too.
Yeah. Are you doing a lot of? Is a typical day for you involve a lot of YouTube creation and talking on video or anything like that?
Yeah. I go back and forth, and some days I want to batch them together, and then others just do one at a time. But yeah, it feels like I always have this microphone in front of me.
Yeah. And which mic are you using now?
This is the PreSonus PX1. Excellent. It's like $130. Because when I do PreSonus videos, I need to have a PreSonus mic, and I'm too lazy to swap it out for the Roswell from one video to the next. So sorry,
because I've seen that one too before.
Yeah. What's funny is no matter what mic I use, I get the question, man, what mic is that? Which tells me it's probably not the mic.
Nice.
You know what I mean?
That's how people compliment your voice, your speaking voice.
Sure. There we go.
So another song on the record, Last to Know, has a great chorus vocal going on, and it's sort of a subtle effect, but it sounds to me like maybe it's a doubling. And I wondered if you remembered anything about that particular track. And then a reminder, rock stars, as Joe was saying, it's the one with the 3 feet. We've got a link right in the show notes, so you can just, when you're ready to go listen to Joe's record. I think I went and found your previous records and threw them in there too.
Cool.
So go click through and you can listen to that. And then we'll have links to over to Joe's YouTube channels and stuff like that. I'm going to say plural because you've just done so many. You've got Home Studio Corner, but we'll get to this too. But now you're taking over Recording Revolution creation as well.
Just bonkers. Yeah. So to your question about Last to Know, so pretty sure, yes, it's a doubled vocal. And I'm pretty sure there's slapback delay, and I'm pretty sure there's some distortion somewhere in there, possibly on the delay. The delay I use in Studio One, it's just a built-in analog delay, but it's got a drive knob, which is super cool, and you can get a pretty gnarly delay sound. With a slapback at 100 milliseconds or whatever, you can't quite tell where the distortion's coming from. You just know it sounds gritty, and you love it. Yeah. That I probably overuse that. If you go listen to a few of my songs, you'll probably hear it more than you probably should. But I like it. I can't get enough of it.
Why not, man? Do what you like. It's your music.
I heard that that Dan Auerbach has one of those old tape delays that's just in line before it goes to the Marshall head. So like no matter what he's doing, there's a little slapback delay on it. And granted, he has like 3 more amps on stage, but I'm like, I dig it. I like that sound. So I got a delay that's always on when I plug into the amp too, because it's just, I just like that little extra.
That's cool. So Dan Auerbach is the Black Keys Rockstars, if you're not familiar with their music. Great sounds, and those guys are making very cool sounding records and have been for quite a while. And we've had some guests on the show to talk about making some of those records.
Cool.
So when you're doubling a vocal, anything you've learned about what kind of post-production is appropriate? Have you found that it's helpful to tune vocals? And would you tune the double? Is there a risk of over-tuning it so that they no longer sound doubled?
Yeah, I do tune. I just use the built-in Melodyne in Studio One. I used to be a purist, and then I realized, oh, it sounds better when I tune it. It's like, I know I can hit the note, but anyway. So I do. With doubling, I'm trying to think. I may not try to tune it as much, or I may just tune one of them. I can't remember. But yes, occasionally there's times where I tune it and it's like, okay, now it's got the weird phasey weirdness thing. Yeah. So I'll undo one of them. And sometimes I'll sing the double off the mic a little bit, so it's not the exact same tone.
Yeah.
And that helps it not do that weird phase thing.
That's a great tip and I think I was just talking about this on the last episode, just encouraging the rock stars to experiment more with where they are on the mic. So when especially when you're doing vocals and you're layering things, sing a lead right on the mic where you think you're supposed to be. And then when you go to the double, back off, turn your head to the side. When you do harmonies, if you're having a little bit of trouble blending that harmony in, just step back from the mic and kind of like sing it differently, just blend it in differently. And it's surprising how well that can work.
Yeah, I feel like I do a lot of critiques, and a lot of times the harmonies are just as thick or thicker than the lead, and it just totally messes everything up. And so obviously that's a mix thing, but one way to not have that problem is to just back off the mic so that it's already thinner. So if I want it to be thin in the mix anyway, why not just back off the mic and bake it in? Which has the plus side of if someone else mixes it, they won't mess that part up.
Yeah, nice. I mean, I've been amazed at how effective all those little subtle moves can be on building a vocal up. And, a lot of the times, a lot of my experience is from the production seat, from the control room when somebody else is singing and guiding them through. It can get a little tricky when you're like going back and forth between multiple tracks and you're like, oh, no, that was the one where you stepped back a little. Oh, that's the one where you're back up close, But it's definitely worth experimenting with and exploring rock stars. Okay, so let's see. What else I want to ask you about when it comes to tuning vocals? I don't really remember. So let's keep talking about your studio then. We'll probably come back to some questions about the record too. Your studio, let's describe it. So you have a home studio. You're 100%. Making a record that sounds like a big rock record. Sounds like, Black Hole Sun in a home studio. So tell us how you do that.
Man, you keep saying, okay. Yeah, so I am in everything I've made except for one of those EPs from that year I did 4 has been recorded in my home studio. Now we've moved a bunch, but they've all been roughly the same. And this one is typical. I'm in a neighborhood that has lots of bonus rooms over the garage. So that's where I am. The ceiling is slanted, kind of an A-shaped room. It's kind of a square room, 20 by 20, but the ceiling helps a lot. Carpeted floors, and yeah, I've got treatment that like homemade like gobos and panels and stuff that I had a guy make 10 years ago, and I just keep moving them around. So there's very little in the way of anything other than that. And so drums were just over there in the corner, and bass was over there, and
so it's basically the angled ceiling. I forget what you call it, gabled ceiling above your head. And then do you find that it's helpful to put panels up on the ceiling in a space like that and really kind of?
It probably would be. I haven't yet. I've got 2 that I haven't used. There's like 2x4 frames that I'll do a video on it where I'll mount them above where I'm sitting right now, which is underneath one of those slants. I imagine that'll help, but obviously I haven't done it yet, so it must not be it must not be a huge deal.
So it's a long room, long rectangle, and the roof ridge runs the length of the room, for example?
Yes. So it's really like 20 by 21. So it's almost square, but there's a window on one side, stairway on the other, and then in between, everything's sloped to the sides.
All right. So if it's square, then, well, I guess it's fascinating because, of course, we hear that square is the worst shape you can have for a room. Yet you've figured out ways to make it work. So what are some things that you've noticed about that? Or do you just, is part of noticing just saying like, yeah, screw it, don't worry about it. just
I mean, that's a part of it. Like, I don't want to poo-poo on professional treatment and all that, because it's good. That's the old joke I used to say is, I used to spend a lot of time on like the Gear Sluts forum, and it seems like no matter what your question was, the answer was acoustic treatment. Right. Like, what's the best mic for vocals? They're like, well, if your room's not treated, it doesn't matter. It's like, well, okay, that's not the question. But so I don't know, because I've had these. I've got two big, like 7 foot tall by like 3 foot wide gobos that are probably a good 3-4 inches thick. I think they're 4 inches thick because it's 2x4s. Got two of those. One of them's on casters. One of them just leans against the wall because the casters broke. So those are big. I usually have those to the left and right of the mix position most of the time, and then I move them around for vocals or something like that. And then I've got two more that are like 8 feet tall, 2 feet wide, and those are just in the back corner behind my mix position. So if I'm looking at you at my desk, they're just back against the wall, leaning against the wall as like bass traps.
So that is room treatment. You might have said you didn't have anything on the ceiling, but that counts as room treatment for sure. That,
and then the carpet on the floors makes a big difference. It just helps.
And furniture and stuff, right?
Furniture and stuff helps a lot too. Like, I've had rooms that are hardwood floors, and that's nice, but it's hard to get all that to tame down without having to bring in a bunch of rugs and stuff.
Yeah. It's sort of easier at times to excite the mics you've got to bring out the reverb than it is to make it go away.
100%. Yeah. Because then, you sing a loud vocal and then you want to compress it, but there's a whole crap load of room from your hardwood floors that maybe sounds nice, but it doesn't work for the song. And every time you compress the vocal, it sounds like you added a reverb and you didn't really want to. So I would just prefer carpet or a bunch of rugs if I had my druthers. And then I think the sloped ceiling, I've been in 2 studios now with sloped ceilings and 2 with like drop tile ceilings. I think that makes a big difference. So I think square, when it's a cube, probably, I know smaller rooms are terrible. The bigger the room, the better, generally, I've found.
Yeah.
And then a big room with this slanted ceiling, it's just cool because in my head, at least, the sound is going out the back of the speakers. If it's going up, it's hitting there and bouncing over my head
behind you. Yeah.
And I don't even really need diffusers at the back wall because there's another slanted one that redirects it to the floor. Now I know the low frequencies maybe don't do that as much, but I mean, it's kind of I do what I can. I put some stuff up and then I'm making stuff that I think sounds good. So I'm kind of good with it. Could it be better? Sure.
Have you had your speakers in different parts of the room at different iterations of your studio and heard a difference between they sound one way over here and they sound one way over here?
Yes. So for me, what's interesting is when I don't have the side panels up, that makes the biggest difference to me. So if I forget to put them up or I'm sitting down, like everything kind of goes to mono or feels lopsided. And I'll be like moving the speakers and checking that the volumes are the same on the back and all that stuff. And then realize, I just need to put the panels up. And then the stereo width comes back, everything's in place. So like I always tell people, if you can only do one thing, get something on the left and right of your speakers. So at least they're not bouncing off the side walls and jacking with your ears.
That's one of the most frustrating things is finding yourself feeling like you're in a state of doubt about whether your speakers are showing you what you think they're showing you, especially the like, wait, are they the same volume as each other, as the left and the right? What are some ways that when you check to just see if a speaker's, the left speaker is not louder or softer than the right speaker, for example, how do you do that? Is it as simple as just use your ear and see what you think? Or is it, have you found any tricks that can help you do that?
So when I doubt that, if it's not the gobo thing or something on the sides, it's usually I'll hit the mono button on my central station and then I'll sit in the middle. And if it's not right up the middle, what I'm listening to, then if it's to the left, I'll turn the right one up or the left one down or whatever.
Yeah. Okay.
But I mean, I try to like have them at the same volume on the back, and then the central station has these trim pots for left and right, so I can tweak it a little bit more.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things I've had to do it a handful of times, and then it just kind of stays. Like nobody's coming in and moving them. So that's nice.
Yeah. Are you recording your own music or other people's music in your studio, but you're having trouble figuring out how to get your mixes to sound great? Do they sound kind of weak or distant or lack punch and clarity? Well, I've got a gift to help you take your mixes from sounding like basement demos to sounding much closer to professional mixes. And it's my free course called Mix Master Bundle. This course will show you how to get pro-sounding mixes from your home studio with free and stock plugins in Pro Tools. And the best part is that these mixing techniques work for you in any DAW, whether you're on Logic, Cubase, Studio One, Reaper, anything you can think of. If you're ready now to make your best record ever, then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, and you can find the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. Well, all right, so let's talk about, so we got a sense of the space. The 20 by 21 is pretty big, so that does leave some rooms for a drum set to be set up and kind of speak into the room some, which is great. What about the gear that you use? Now, I know you're a big fan of PreSonus, and you have a lot of their stuff, and it's worked really well for you. So talk to us about that. What PreSonus gear you use, and what are some of the tools that you're surrounded by while you're working?
Yeah. So if like every time I've talked to you, my gear hasn't really changed much. So like Studio Live, digital mixer sitting in front of me, which I don't use for mixing. I just use it for recording, but it's just really nice. Like I don't know if I could go back to having to play the latency game. Yeah. Adjusting buffers.
So how does it, so explain that. So when you say you use it for recording and that it avoids the latency game, how does it do that?
So if you think about it's just a mixer, right? So if I'm playing at a coffee shop and I ask the guy for more vocal in the monitor, he turns it up. There's no latency, right? It's just a round trip. I mean, there is some, but it's not. It sounds normal.
It's tiny.
And then when you go to recording in software, a lot of times there's that their buffer setting, however it's set. It's just going to take time for that sound to get in and back out,
right?
Which is fine. And technology has gotten to the point where it's not as big of a deal as it was a decade and a half ago. But it's just really nice that when I record, we're all just listening off the mixer. So we could turn the computer off and throw it away, and we'd all still hear the same thing.
Is it a nice computer? Because if you're going to throw it away, just let me know.
I'll let you know. I'll throw it away gently. No, I just got this one, so it's got.
Okay, so let me say that back to you. So when you're using the mixer, your mics are going into the mixer, and so you can hear yourself on a fader mix, of the band or whatever overdub you're doing. And then that's also feeding Studio One and then coming back from the computer. Now, does this create any kind of stuff where you have to mute your track coming back from Studio One and then unmute it and that kind of thing?
Great question. So the way I've set it up, and of course I've painstakingly tried different ways, but so we're all listening off the board, and then I reserve channels 1 and 2 for the playback from Studio One. So once we stop, or if we're playing along to a click, well, it's on its own channel too, or just something we've already recorded or we're punching in, we can still hear that on the channels 1 and 2, and then we hear ourselves and everything else. So I'm not monitoring through the software at all. So I'm recording to, the kick drum's going to channel 1 or whatever, but it's not coming back out of Studio One while we're recording. It comes back when we play.
Now, does that present challenges sometimes? Like if you're punching your voice in and you're doing overdubs, is that a time where you just say, I'm just going to let my voice go through Studio One and hear it that way, so that when I press play, I'm hearing what's on tape, and when I go into record, I'm now hearing my voice? Or do you have to just mute the audio track and then unmute it at different times, that sort of thing?
So for that, no, I do the same workflow for pretty much everything, because I'm always hearing my voice no matter what Studio One's doing. Like right now, I could stop recording, unrecord, enable that track. I'm still hearing my voice. So the way I've got it set up in Studio One is when it's playing back, I hear the vocal, but when I'm recording, I don't hear anything from Studio One. So that way I can hear the vocal leading up to the punch in, and when it starts recording, I'm not hearing anything else. I'm still hearing my mic. So I can hear myself leading up to it, singing along with myself if I want to. And then when the punch in happens, I stop hearing the playback and I just hear myself.
Now, does Studio One sort of automatically do that so that you're only hearing the one version of yourself, or is that some trick you had to?
It's not a trick, but it's a setting. Because I would argue most people don't need that, but it's just, I forget even which one. It's something about monitoring mute playback or something like that.
Okay, cool.
To where, or the bigger thing is, there's a monitor button on each channel. Remember back when Pro Tools wouldn't let you monitor off of a channel, like that input button? You could record enable, but
we
you
had
couldn't.
An input button.
Yeah, the input button was only HD or something. But so Studio One has that button, and they're two separate buttons. So you can tell it to, whenever I record enable something, turn on the monitor button so I'm hearing that input, or you can turn that off. So when I record enable, I can see, like I'm looking at it right now, I can see level, I can see it's recording an audio track, but that audio track's not coming out the output.
Okay,
because
cool.
I have that button deselected.
So the reason, Rockstars, why we're asking this very granular question is because if you were hearing your voice immediately through the mixer and then you wanted to record and then you also heard it back with the latency from Studio One or whatever you're recording to, then you'd hear a slight doubling of your voice, which could throw you off.
Which if you use like a small interface, you've heard that with like the mix knob, the one, that's kind of how they get around it.
Right,
it's
exactly.
That same idea, but not as annoying as having to mess with a mix knob all the time.
Yeah, well, it is so crucial to solve the latency problem. I think especially as a singer, because it throws off your sense of pitch center if you're not sure, if something sounds funny to you about your voice. And I've noticed a lot of stuff as I've gotten more into singing and put the headphones on more, things I never really thought about before. So for example, if I was to turn the mix down low enough, now I'm hearing my own natural head voice more than what's coming out of the earphones. And that's a different perspective on pitch. If I turn the headphones up just enough to match my head voice, when I say head voice, Rockstars, I just mean the sound, the physical sound in my head that's going from my, voice directly to my ears, then you start to get into potential cancellations between what's coming out of the earphone and what's naturally happening. And then if you turn up your headphones even more, now you're just hearing really what's coming out of the headphone. And those are all like different experiences. So, so stuff that's worth experimenting with and just sort of seeing what works best for you.
And the other cool thing I do with the mixer is, so I do a lot of my videos, I don't have headphones on because I want to hear it out of the speakers. But obviously I have a vocal mic, and that could be, Squeal City because it's a condenser mic, feet away from the speakers.
Especially if you gain it up like I do in the studio.
Yeah. So the way I get around that for video stuff, and we end up using it for the studio as well, is all my anything that I want to come out of the speakers, I've got set up on a solo bus. So if I solo those channels, that comes out of my speakers, but everything else doesn't. So all the microphones don't get soloed. So if we go to listen to playback, we say, hey, let's listen to that, take off the headphones, listen on speakers. I don't have to do that. Beep, 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 like turn them all off and then turn them back on, which is just annoying. I just have it set to where all the live mics are just going to Studio One, and the only thing coming out of the speakers is the playback when I turn the speakers on.
That does bring up another question. So Rockstars, if you're in a home studio setting and you're going from headphones to speakers to headphones to speakers, one of the things you really don't want to do is blow up your speakers by accident. So do you find that you just get confident about it and you just hit a button and speakers are unmuted? Or have you found that it's wise practice to just always turn the volume knob down and then bring it back up when you're ready for speakers? And that way you can kind of catch it right away if it's starting to feed back.
Well, you only have to do it a handful of times to like train yourself that was unpleasant. I did it just the other day on accident. I hit the solo button. I didn't mean to, and everything squealed and it was great. But no, generally I have I've got like 2 or 3 levels that I set my volume knob for my speakers and I don't touch it. So I just hit the mute button. And the way I've got it set up right now is I've really got to screw it up for this mic to come out of these speakers. I've got to specifically go hit that button on that channel. So right now, I've got my speakers muted now because I'm using headphones for the podcast. But if I were to unmute, I'd be fine. I would hear you out of the speakers, but I wouldn't hear myself.
Okay.
So it's kind of it's got kind of a built-in safety mechanism of sorts.
It'd be good if your speakers were down for this podcast interview because it sure does get to be a challenge for editing if there's a bunch of other stuff coming through.
Because you're always going to be a little later. There's a whole latency thing. Yeah.
You know what, Rockstars? I'm going to reveal a little bit of how we do this because this is the one show where we get to talk about stuff like that.
That's right.
So I'm using a dynamic right now, a dynamic mic. I'm actually on my Mic Tech PM9, which is one that I use for a lot of these episodes. Joe is on a condenser. He's on the PreSonus. What is it?
PX1.
PX1. What does that stand for? Pixie or something?
Probably, yeah.
All right, cool. So that's, you're already hearing the difference between a condenser mic and a dynamic mic right now. I'm now recording into a Sound Devices MixPre 10, which is a battery-powered portable device that's really very cool.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's a cool thing. And then that doubles as an audio interface. So that's going to the computer, and then it's the audio face input to Zoom. And one of the cool things about this MixPre, this is pretty geeky stuff here, but I can press record on that too. So it's recording my voice directly onto a track. And I've set up track 7 on the MixPre to be USB 1 return from Zoom. So it's also recording your voice just in case I want it.
Yeah.
And then Zoom has the built-in record, you can record locally, and Zoom will, if you haven't ever experimented with this, Rockstar, Zoom will record the voices onto separate audio tracks for you, which is very helpful. I don't know how often that stuff matters for music making, but obviously for podcasts and video stuff, it's a big deal. And then my recent ninja tip is if I want a computer version of just a clean recording of my mic that doesn't potentially have any Zoom, processing going on, QuickTime on a Mac. You just open QuickTime, say new audio recording, and make sure my mic is selected as the input, and that records it. Now, what about on your end, Joe? Let's really geek out on this. How are you capturing audio? And then after this, Rockstars, Joe will send his audio file to me.
Correct.
And depending on what we think, we may use that one. We might use the Zoom one. We just use whatever works best.
Yeah, I love this stuff because it's funny how, I get these questions quite a bit. Like, hey, okay, how in the world do you get this audio and this audio to this location? So yeah, I'm recording myself just to a single audio track in Studio One, nothing fancy. And then I use combination of an app called Loopback and an app called Audio Hijack, both from a company called Rogue Amoeba, which they really should just be one app. They hold off on the Loopback features in Audio Hijack, so you have to buy. It's fine. Good. I'm happy for them. But so what Audio Hijack does, it takes my input from my mixer that I tell it to, and I've got a limiter. I've got the FabFilter Pro L2 hitting that, so it's just basically adding about 6 dB, so it's a little more closer to mastered level. Which means if I'm playing mastered music on my mixer, I turn it down 6 dB, so the net result is nothing. And then that goes out to Loopback, which routes the audio it creates its own little internal audio device that is then now the source for Zoom, which is what you hear. Yeah.
Loopback is one of those little internal audio device apps that essentially just becomes a patch cable inside the computer.
Yep. It reminds me of the old...
You can send something to it, and just like sending it to a physical. Yeah. Right. Exactly. Where you could flip it
around and patch things.
Now, let's not sound too reminiscent. There's some rock stars out there that are still rocking Reason today, I think it's still going pretty strong, isn't it?
Is it called Record now, or is Record their DAW?
I don't know about that.
I can't remember.
I haven't used it in a minute, but it was so cool when it came out.
It was so cool. The drum machine, the little 16-step sequencer was my jam.
Yeah. Yeah. Everything that was done in Reason always seemed to sound like, like Kraftwerk. It sounded like German sort of techno programming. It was very on, as opposed to it didn't seem to have much shuffle action going on.
Yeah. That sounds very German.
Yeah. Okay,
I can say that because PreSonus, the whole software team is in Germany. So
there you go. All right.
Don't get mad at me.
PreSonus is great. I love those guys. I have the Studio Live mixer as well, that was actually the mixer that I took down the last few years at Bonnaroo in my Haybell studio. And it was really a cool experience to figure out how to recreate that live mixing on a digital board. It took a couple more button clicks. Yeah. I just had to sort of come up with a new rhythm. Yeah. So instead of grabbing a fader and then immediately reaching for an EQ, I would locate the fader visually, hit the select button, and then go for the EQ. And it just became like a rhythmic dance,
I've not done much live sound with period, but with the Studio Live, so I could see. It takes an extra button push in the studio, not really a big deal, but I could see how live those extra button pushes can stress you out.
Did you ever use the Yamaha O2R back in the day?
Yeah, they had them at MTSU when I was there, but it was literally just a playback device. I didn't really... Yamaha, the Yamaha menus freak me out. I've got an old Motif, the ES8. It's like, you want to get in there, it's like, all right, give me a cup of coffee. I'm diving into a Yamaha menu.
He's cracking his neck right now, Rockstars. He's flexing. He's getting ready.
Gonna do
like
battle.
Rocky before a fight. The Yamaha, that mixer was one of the first digital mixers to come along in my experience. And I did do some mixing on it. I mixed some records on it. And I remember having to train myself every time I wanted to make a move. Like, let's say I just wanted to back up and ride the vocal through the chorus. It was like this choreographed dance of like 7 button pushes, which you had to get just right in a row, and then you were going, and then you had your shot, and you did it, and then it's like, oh, didn't get it. You'd have to rewind, the ADATs or whatever, and then coordinate your 7 button pushes again. So we've come a long way, Rockstars. We really have. Let's see. Let's talk a little bit more about how you use some of these tools in the studio.
Yeah.
What do songwriters, music producers, DJs, EDM, TV, and film composers all have in common? They all need incredibly cool sounds that instantly transport the music to the style that they want. This is why Native Instruments is your ultimate toolkit with a massive library of sounds. Whether you want to create hip-hop, indie pop, classic rock, meditation music, pumping dance floor beats, or full orchestral arrangements, Native Instruments Complete Bundle offers you everything you need, from drums, loops, and beats to wild synths, ultra-realistic strings, and vintage electric bass, guitars, and keys. The list goes on and on. I personally love recording real bands in my studio and adding cool drum samples, synths, and futuristic keys from Battery, Contact, Massive X, Guitar Rig, and Hybrid keys, for example. Plus, it's super fun to create a string section for a rock band. Come on, go get Complete Start for free today with a bundle of 2,000 sounds and 6 gigs of samples over at nativeinstruments.com and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off. Some restrictions apply. Adam Audio introduces the all-new A-Series line of monitors, featuring the XART accelerated ribbon tweeter design, built-in DSP-based room correction, and speaker voicings to allow you to customize your Adam Audio monitors to your control room. The A-Series will rock in any studio. Small studio spaces or immersive multi-speaker configurations are perfect for the A4V or the new A7V, the next generation of the incredibly popular A7X. Mid-size rooms and narrow spaces will love the low profile of the A44H, expanding on the A7V sound, or the A77H, a true 3-way midfield monitor delivering rich, spacious sound. And bigger studios will love the A8H, a 3-way speaker and the pinnacle of the A-Series that delivers extremely accurate sound required for critical listening environments. Get the Adam Audio monitors and subwoofers that are right for your studio with an extended 5-year warranty at adamaudio.com. Hey, Rockstars, we're back now for the second half of the show, a.k.a. the Jam Session. My guest today is Joe Gilder, a.k.a. Home Studio Corner King, joining us on Recording Studio Rockstars. You ready to jam, dude?
Let's jam.
All right, so one other tip I'll mention about how we do these interviews is, and I talked about this before, but I got this great little box called a Stream Deck Mini.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've gotten into automation and stuff like that, but there's so many fun tools now for giving yourself one button to do things. And I actually programmed it to do a couple of very cool things. it will mute my mic for a Zoom call. So I've got like mic on, video on and off buttons. I've got one that I can highlight my next question in a Google Doc, and then I can just press the button and it'll cross it out. Like we already answered that question.
And then great.
And then the bottom three, one just says marker in. So like if you know, which I just wear that one out because that's when you say something cool and I'm like, ooh, that could be a good intro. Just drop a little marker, and then there's a cough marker, and then there's sort of like a break marker.
I saw the cough.
Those ones are fun because what's that?
I saw the cough one come up in the chat. I'm guessing that's what it does.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. It actually, I programmed it to create a message inside Zoom, and then later that the chat in a Zoom call is time-stamped, so it'll line up with your video or your audio recording.
That's so cool.
It's fun stuff. You know, we get to geek out on that stuff.
I've gotten big into Keyboard Maestro.
But
I haven't incorporated a physical device with it yet. But
that's what it is. It's perfect
for
that.
One.
Yeah, I think the marker things are all Keyboard Maestro commands. Fun stuff. And then SoundFlow, of course, is a new one that is very focused towards Pro Tools and audio production rock stars. So if you're curious about having a button controller that will just like do magical things in Pro Tools, or it would work with Studio One or Logic or whatever you're using. It's cool stuff.
I've never heard of this. All right.
Yeah, you should check them out. And they, when you go there, it sort of takes over. If you use SoundFlow, it takes over your Stream Deck. And then you can sort of download these packs where they're pre-created. So it's basically a deck that has all these pre-created macros that will interact with your software. And then you can, of course, make your own too. All right, enough of that geekery. So we were talking more about your studio. So it's cool to hear the way you use the mixer. Things that I've noticed about using a mixer. So I love it when you don't have to hear latency. That's a huge deal in the studio, Rockstars. If you're dealing with latency now, solve that first, and you're going to be so much happier trying to make music in your studio. Totally. An example of that is if you've ever plugged in a MIDI keyboard and then you're trying to play that cool sound, and it just seems like the sound isn't coming back out of the speakers the same way you were playing it, and then you're doubting whether you can actually play very well. It may just be that your buffer settings and your latency is screwed up, you know, and that's the same kind of experience when you're with the audio latency. It'll really mess you up. It can make you play out of time too, especially when you're plugging a bass or a guitar straight in. But the other thing I was going to say about mixers that is very cool is when you're working quickly, you got an instrument in your hand. You don't have free hands to go to a keyboard and a mouse and everything. So being able to just grab that fader and bring it up and down because it's right in front of you really helps a lot. One of the places I find that often is it's super helpful when you're auditioning keyboard sounds and synths because those like can be wildly different. And you need to quickly set it level in the mix to even decide whether you like that sound. Yeah. You know?
Yeah, it's funny. Like I mean, obviously we love technology. We just got done nerding out about technology, but I love that when I'm in like recording mode, like I'm not on keyboard and mouse all that much. I'm using the keyboard to hit record and rewind and playback, which now you're making me want to get something different so I don't even touch the keyboard. But I can't stop thinking about it. But yeah, it's like I've got a fader here to move things up and adjust mixes. I can do different headphone mixes from the mixer too. It's just a whole layer of like functionality I don't even have to access in the software because of the mixer in front of me. And I'm sure somebody's wondering about how it works. So it's just USB. It's like old USB. So it just becomes my audio the mixer. So it becomes my audio interface. And it doesn't really matter that USB is a lower latency protocol because I'm already hearing it off the board before it ever goes to USB.
Right. Yeah, good point. And then the Studio Live mixers from PreSonus, they have things like the fat channel section, if that's what they're still calling it, I think, which is like, one area on there that covers, you've got your EQ knobs accessible, you've got compression and stuff like that. My brother, I was helping him assemble his music school this fall, and still has one of the very early, like old school Studio Live mixers where it's like, you know, there's dedicated knobs for all that stuff too.
I did like that a
lot. The newer ones are a little bit more like soft knobs and soft buttons because I think they're just remaining flexible because they know that, you know, the future holds new things that are going to need to be controlled by those same knobs.
Yeah.
What about the mixing process? Do you find the mixer helpful when you're mixing, or do you kind of go to the keyboard for that?
I'm just used to the mouse for that. Because there's so much. So like the Studio Live that I'm using is a Series 3. So it has what they call DAW mode. So I can hit a button and the faders jump and it works like a fader port or just any kind of traditional. But I just don't find that useful enough. It's nice to move the faders around and like that's that whole like dream, like, oh, my hands are on faders just like in the ads in Mix magazine. But reality, like once I've set those basic levels, I don't really. Honestly, I use something like this, which is I'm holding up it's technically an IO Station 24C from PreSonus, but it's basically their single channel fader port.
Yeah.
Which I find having a single fader is almost as valuable as having whatever I have here, 16. Because or 24. It's 24. Because I really am just moving one fader at a time. Nobody's really doing this, right? With 8 fingers on 8 faders. Like maybe they did that when they were doing, you know, what is one of the story of the Jimi Hendrix album where they were all hands on the faders while it mixed down. We don't have to do that anymore. So having one fader where I click on a track and my left hand's on a fader and I can move it, that workflow actually works better for me than having to hunt down and find the fader on the mixer because I have to go find it, right? So this one just jumps to whatever track is selected. To me, that's faster and more efficient. So that if I use a fader, that's it. So yeah, and then because with so much of what we do in mixing is we're doing tweaking plugins, and I mean, if they ever came up with something that really did map well to plugins and was super easy to use, I'd consider it. But otherwise, it has to be generic enough to map to lots of different things. So like even this Studio Live mapping to PreSonus made plugins, it only gives me, it's only like 8 knobs here, and I can't choose which features are on which of those knobs, and I have to remember it, and it becomes more work to try to use the controller.
Yeah, that's the thing about using controllers is you don't want to replace one task with a new task of having to think about how you're interfacing with the controller. You know, it needs to. If it's not making it easier, then it's you're probably not going to adapt. Or adopt it rather. And, you know, I've explored a lot of different variations. I've messed around with Studio Live. I've messed around with the Avid S1. I now have the SSL UF8.
Yeah.
And every one of them involves, they're all very great. They're all very cool and they do very cool things.
Sure.
But each one of them involved me going, all right, Lidge, put on your big boy homework pants and go down to the studio and start learning it, you know?
Yeah.
And then decide whether it works for you. So that's always a reminder for me is sometimes you got to just, you know, there's still no magic beans for making records. You still got to go down there and do the work.
The closest thing to magic, and it's dumb in its simplicity, and I don't know if it works with Pro Tools, but there's a mode on this. If you just go Google PreSonus fader port, you'll see there's a big blue knob in the middle, and that usually defaults to like switching channels or maybe doing panning. But there's a mode called Link. And when I turn that mode on, whatever my mouse is hovering over in Studio One, I can turn the knob to adjust that. So it can be this kind of two-handed workflow where I don't have to map anything. I hover over the compressor input and then I turn the knob with my left hand. I haven't done that in a while, but it's a fun workflow if you want a little tactile response, but you don't want to map anything or have to memorize anything. It's just when I hover over this knob. Now, is that more work than clicking and dragging? Probably not, but it's not much more work, especially if you're used to kind of the right hand on the mouse, left hand on the controller workflow. It's kind of fun.
Yeah, and so are you a mouse user?
I'm a trackpad guy.
Trackpad, okay.
Yeah.
If you have a trackball like the Kensington Pro Mouse,
everybody in Nashville has the stupid ball. I don't get it. I don't get it.
You know, I was introduced to it in like 98.
Yeah.
A guy named Mr. Carson, who was up at Smart Studios. He was the advanced Pro Tools guy and I was the young guy, and I went up and he was like, you really need to get one of these. I was like, okay. And I got it. and I hated it. Hated it. It was so hard to train myself to use a trackball instead of a mouse.
Yeah.
But once I got used to it, then it was like blazing fast compared to doing it other ways.
So give me the elevator pitch on what makes it amazing, because you started to mention the
so there's a couple of thoughts on it. Remember, I'm going back to 98. So once as with many things, once we become adept at something, we're really just not going to switch.
Right.
So I don't know if I can sell you on it today versus other options 100%, but the ball makes it easy to like zip your mouse to a far part of the screen very quickly, especially on a big screen.
Yeah.
And what really sold me on it back in the day was back in OS 9. We're talking about back in OS 9, Rockstars.
What was that? Was that Tiger? Panther?
I don't even remember. It was before OS X, you know. And it was and you could do modifier keys along with the 4 buttons. So without leaving your hands off the main keyboard and the trackball, you could have, you know, I could have the top 2 be zoom out, zoom in. I could have the top chord be delete. I could have the bottom right be separate region. I could have the bottom chord be something else. And then you could do any combination of modifier keys and you'd get all that again multiplied. So you could have
end up having a couple dozen.
Oh yeah, a couple dozen commands without ever having to move your hand away from anything. So it felt more like playing a video game, you know.
Do you know Gregor from PreSonus, my counterpart? So he uses one of those gaming mice that has like a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 number pad at the thumb, and he maps all kinds of, like he uses it kind of like you use your Stream Deck, like he maps each of those buttons to some crazy thing. I get it, but so I was using just a regular old dumb mouse and my wrist kept hurting, and so I tried different mice, and then I eventually just used the trackpad, which is, it seems dumb.
Trackpad works pretty great.
It's cool because it has all the different gestures. So like I use 3-finger click and drag. So when I'm dragging something, I don't have to hold the click down. I just hold 3 fingers, and I'm like right now I'm flying your head around the screen. It's delightful. But do you feel dizzy? Are you okay?
No, I get motion sickness easily. So
okay, I'll stop. But and then I can like pinch to zoom, and I can scroll right and left and up and down with just 2 fingers, kind of inside a session, so I can navigate pretty quickly. But yeah, it worked. My wrist stopped hurting. But yeah, I remember when I came back to Nashville in like, it was around 09, whoever the Kensington salesman was for Nashville must have just been rolling, because I feel like everybody had that thing, or the one that was more, you clicked with your thumb and it was a red ball and it was a little more elongated, but it was that same idea. Thankfully, most studios had a mouse next to it for the dumb guys like me who would come in and didn't know how to work the stupid thing. But yeah, I can't.
I think all that really matters, Rockstars, is that you're fast.
That's right. Speed matters. I don't think people realize it until they see it in action. Because if you've never been in like a quote unquote pro studio or in that environment, you have just no clue how quickly both the musicians, like, let's rehearse it once and then lay it down once, and that's it, right? Like there's that element, and then there's the, hey, can I get punched in at that, you know, going into the second chorus? There we go, and you're in. Like it's that quick versus like if you work with a buddy in a studio. I remember a friend of mine wanted to work on his engineering, so he had me over and just to do like a guitar vocal. And so I was just the musician for that session. And I remember being like, hey, can I go do a double on that chorus? And I would expect, like when I work, it's 3 beats and we're there, like 1, 2, 3. Okay, here's 2 bars. Here we go. Pray, like go, hit record, which is, I'm assuming, how you work too. But for him, it was like, all right, let's take a 5-minute coffee break while he goes and sets everything up. And it was one of those moments where I realized, okay, this really does kill the flow entirely. Like I was ready to sing. Now I feel like I have to get back in that space because the engineer is taking so long. And even if you're the only person in the room, being quick is super handy because you can get back in the flow. And also you can just, if you get things done quicker, you can do more things.
I I am totally blown away with Isotope Ozone, rock stars. I've been mastering a lot of my records recently, and Ozone makes it so easy for me to get a fantastic sound. The mastering assistant will help you get started by measuring your track and suggesting all the settings you need to get a professionally targeted result based on the genre and EQ curve of your choice. You can even reference a specific song if you want, using simple yet sophisticated modules like Clarity, Impact, Low-End Focus, Stabilizer, Imager, Exciter, and Spectral Shaping, along with powerful dynamic EQ, compression, and limiting. You simply adjust the settings to your own taste, and it sounds incredible. And don't get me started on Master Rebalance, which literally lets you reach into the mix and manipulate the vocals, bass, and drums at the mastering stage. My bandmates are pretty demanding of my mixes, but now when I send off the masters for approval, I get comments back like, "Holy shit, pristine, damn good mastering, crystal clear, dude, you're a wizard. Finally, I love my singing, and the drums and bass sound huge." Check out the newest Ozone, RX, and all the other great plugins at isotope.com and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off. OWC is your one-stop shop for flexible drive storage and connectivity solutions for your studio. The Mini Stack STX for your Mac Mini adds 2 additional drives over a universal SATA HDD SSD bay and an NVMe M.2 PCIe SSD, plus 3 additional Thunderbolt USB ports. The OWC Thunder Bay 4 chassis, built like a tank, gives you 4 hot-swappable 2.5-inch RAID configurable drive bays, plus an extra Thunderbolt 3 jack for daisy chaining up to 5 devices. Or check out the OWC Gemini Thunderbolt 3 dock with 2 RAID configurable drives and 7 ports of connectivity, including a front-side SD card reader, 1 gig Ethernet, 2 USB 3.2 ports, a dedicated display port, and an additional backward-compatible Thunderbolt port. Get your studio connected with the Mini Stack STX, Thunder Bay 4, and Gemini Thunderbolt 3 dock at macsales.com/rockstars. Use the custom link in our show notes because it's a great way for you to help support this podcast. So thanks, Rockstars. Well, it's one of those skill sets that I think you really appreciate once you start becoming a musician yourself. So when you put yourself from the control room to the musician side and you go play, you know, I quickly learned just how fragile my ability to play music is. It's very fragile. Like if my head's in the groove and I've got that guitar part down and it's got the feel, if I have to pause and then come back to it, it's like, forget it. It's already gone. Like the whole vibe of the song, maybe I can get it back, maybe I can't. And so being able to roll really quickly. Now that brings to mind a great trick that I've seen you do. And we may have talked about this before, but I think it's worth bringing up again. You were doing these live songwriting in Studio One videos. And at one point, you were talking about it like maybe a macro you had created or something, so that when you were doing vocals, so for example, let's say you have the music down and now you're layering your vocals on top, and vocals tend to be like, you know, maybe the verse is like 4 phrases, you know, something like that. So it's like a blob of vocals, 1, 2, 3, 4, and you're singing through that, but you need to re-sing phrase 2 or phrase 3. You seem to have figured out some clever ways to hit like one button and it automatically rewinds and drops you back into record in just the right spot so that you never really lose the flow and you don't have to like stop and click a bunch of buttons. And that's a feature that I've appreciated about using Spire Studio from Isotope. But it was cool to see you do it in Studio One. By the way, we might get a chance to hear Doobie the loud dog next door.
Doobie the loud dog. Making an appearance. Love it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So tell us about that.
Yeah. So one of the, and I speak like it's Studio One's the only one that does it. I don't know, because I'm not sitting here switching between DAWs all day. But one thing that struck me about Studio One coming over from Pro Tools years ago was Studio One could keep playing while I messed with stuff. So like I could stop recording on a track, and I've got my bracket buttons on my keyboard are mapped to rewind and fast forward by 1 bar. So I could go back 4 bars by just going tap, 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 tap. And then I could press the next button, which is the little backslash is my record button. So I have just my hands just right there, forward, back, record, forward, back, record. So that means I can stop recording, rewind 4 bars, and it's just going to keep, like, it continues playing from where I rewound to. Rewinded? Rewounded.
Rewounded.
Rewinded. Where I gone back to, and then I can just punch myself back in. So it's this workflow where, like, literally the music doesn't stop. I sing, I'm like, oh, that's not good. And then it goes, yip, 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 yip. And then I'm just still, you know, like the music has literally not stopped.
You know, what's clever too is the fact that you've got it going back so many bars means that it actually sort of, you might even sound like it stays kind of in beat.
Pretty close, yeah. Like you miss just a little bit of it, but like that's a workflow that I use so much because I don't like to do like 5 takes and then comp if I can avoid it because it's just boring. And like you said, you talk about being like the fragility of being the performer. I can't sing 5 takes times 3-4 songs and be any good by the 3rd or 4th song because I'm just worn out. Like I don't sing enough. Like I'm not out there singing 3-hour shows every night to be able to like have that kind of fortitude. So being able to get a take that's pretty good and then just go through and punch in spots without the music ever stopping is really fast, but also it feels better.
Well, and it's great for the writing process too, where you're trying to stay in a mental flow and fix things really, really quickly. So that's a cool tip. So then one of the funny things that I also experience when I'm doing that, when I'm punching myself in, and I don't know if you're familiar with this, rock stars, and maybe you are, Joe, is when you're listening back to stuff and the vocals, you know, you haven't cleaned them up yet. And they've just got all these like rough punches in and out of different places. And then you hear all these like click, 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 like sneaking through the vocal mic,
the sound of the
smacking the keyboard. And it's just like this hilarious like little effect that
the angry
nobody
space bar slam. Bam. Yeah.
Bam, bam,
You get the first half of it.
And then, you know, there are times where if you get a little too quick with it, you're like, ooh, I can't get that out. RX to the rescue. Thank you, Isotope.
Thank you.
But that's a great way to work. You know, the Isotope Spire Studio app, what you do is you play and then you just hit stop and then you hit the record button and it automatically rewinds and then drops you into record and keeps going from there. It's not you can go check it out if you want, rock stars. I don't know if it's still available, the actual hardware unit, but the idea is still the same. Like setting up something for yourself where you don't have to turn on your engineer brain when it's time to go back into record. So in Pro Tools, for example, you need to have pre-roll on. And that's one of the things that's always frustrating for me is like, if I'm listening, I want pre-roll off because I just want to press play from where I am. But if I'm punching, I want it pre-roll on. And so it's like, you know, trying to figure out quick ways to turn that on and off. And probably doing a macro would be a great thing for that, where you could
it's interesting
set up
that
a key to do that for you.
Because in Studio One, when you have pre-roll on, it's only for recording. So it doesn't pre-roll your playback. Like, why would you want it to pre-roll playback?
I don't know.
I'm trying to think of.
I don't know, and I don't remember. Maybe there's a deeper preference now.
Yeah, there probably. Sometimes
what's frustrating with the tools we use is their little changes are being made. All the time that we just don't even know about it. I could, you know, it's easy to spend years going like, man, I really wish we'd do this, and then somebody comes in, well, it does that, and they just show you, and you're like, when did it start doing that?
Since, you know, 8 years ago.
Yeah, so don't beat yourself up too much.
Working closely with the PreSonus software team, it's funny how like they're so in it. They know every feature and when it was released. They're so kind of offended when people don't know that we've been doing this since 2011. It's like, that's great, but just, you know, this person just started using it last year and just found out. Like, I'll do demos of Studio One and I'll show stuff that's been in there since version 2 and we're on version 6 now. And they'll be so huffy, like, Joe, you must show the most latest features. And I'm like, well, but this one that y'all did in version 2 was awesome. And one of the reasons I switched. And I show it to Pro Tools guys and they drool over it. So maybe I'll keep doing that too. And they're like, yeah, but we have all the new things you must show. And so anyway.
Now, what about vocal comping? So you don't enjoy it so much, but how do you comp a vocal in PreSonus? If you, let's say you recorded 5 takes and you want to quickly go through and comp, what would be a smart way to try that?
It's built. The built-in way is pretty slick. So they're called layers in Studio One, which is for like playlists and Pro Tools. You hit a button that shows all the layers. You create a new layer, an empty layer on top, which is your comp layer, which is the same as everybody. But then you can, when you hover over a layer, the cursor turns to a different looking tool, kind of a highlight tool. And whenever you highlight, it just automatically copies it up to the top layer. And what's cool is you can highlight and rehighlight without having to delete anything. It just puts whatever you've highlighted up. So this part of this phrase and then this part of this other take, and it will pop them up to that top layer, and it'll crossfade everything automatically because it knows, of course, I'm going to want this to be crossfaded. So you end up with really fast way to go through and comp it. So when I do have, it's like I don't always comp, but when I do it quickly with Studio One or whatever. Yeah, it's a pretty slick workflow. And I assume the other DAWs have similar things like that.
Pro Tools does have a way where you can spill out all the playlists. And when they first came out with that, that was a very cool feature. Yeah. But now I don't even need it. Now I actually keep the track collapsed, and just using shift and arrows, I can, go through, click my way through the different playlists and press play, listen to each take. And then I just hit select and I do a quick key. I don't remember what it is, Control Option V or something. And it pastes it up to that target.
That's cool.
Comp track. And what for me matters the most is speed when it comes to comping and getting into a musical workflow and being able to hold on to, especially comping, like trying to select between 10 or 20 vocals or something and which one I'm going to use.
Yeah.
I have to hold those numbers in my head. And so I want to be able to like get through them really quickly and then just paste it to a track. And I've come up with some ways that are really fast, and also not necessarily having to use the mouse. But one thing I've definitely noticed is that comping vocals in production, it's a stylistic thing too. It's not one rule, one size fits all. It's like some people like to have 3 takes and they really listen through a whole long phrase and then they go with the one they like the best. And, on the other hand, I might like to break it down to individual syllables until everything's in tune and comp it that way and then sort of see what I've got. But it's cool when you can get a workflow going like that.
Yeah, I'll do it, but if I do record a bunch of takes, because it's a day where I'm like, we just got to do takes. I used to feel this pressure to listen to every single one of them and make the absolute best decision. And now I just listen till I find one that works. And then I go. And I can always change my mind later and go back and listen to the other ones if I'm really bothered by that one. But that saves me some sanity of like, that one's good. Let's keep that and move on. Instead of I need to listen to 3 more just to be sure. Because then it starts to get into this perfectionism thing that's so not rock and roll. Yeah,
I agree. It's like, it's great to set your standards as high as you want them to be, but never if it's at the expense of like staying in the creative flow. There's stuff that happens just like when you're on the spot and you're doing a guitar solo that you would never have done if you tried to compose it first.
Totally.
And same thing with the production and the creation. It's like even with vocal comping, if you slow it down too much, you're going to start making decisions that might not be related to being inspired. They might not be inspired anymore.
Like this take is in tune better, but that take has more energy, even though it's a little pitchy. And like, if you're not careful, you'll pick all the perfectly pitched ones that are boring,
right?
Instead of the really soulful ones that maybe need a little help on the pitch side.
Yeah. Let's talk about lyrics. Let's talk more about songwriting. It's such an important thing to me, and I love talking about that. Do you find that you have stages of songwriting? Do you have a sketching process that seems to be separate from a demoing process that seems to be separate from the final version or anything like that?
Yes. So I'm not one of those people who's writing every day. I write when I need to have some songs. So if I know I want to, like, it's time to do another EP, then it's time to write. It's kind of the way it goes. And my workflow with the band is pretty similar. Like we get in a room and somebody brings a musical idea. which is so helpful. Instead of starting from a blank slate of everybody come up with something on the spot, we generally come in with a quarter to a half of a song, maybe more, that we've done on our own, and then we flesh it out with the group. That's way better than just sitting there staring at each other. And so some of that is, it's usually almost always music first. What's the vibe? What's the groove? What's the chord progression? What's the A section, the B section? Is there...
This is with the band in this too.
And really, yeah, with the band specifically.
But let's maybe even back up before that. So even if you were going to come in with, quote, with something, where does the with something comes from? Because I do find that, you know, if you don't have the, I mean, let's go back to magic beans for a second. If you don't have the bean of an idea to start with, you got no magic vines, and, you know, and then you don't end up with the golden harp and all that. Wow.
Yeah. I love golden harps. So for me, I find a way to capture, so it's almost always a musical idea versus a lyric. The lyric usually comes later. And so I'll have an idea and I record it on my phone, or if I'm here in the studio, I'll record it using Audio Hijack that we talked about earlier. Has a little built-in recorder that saves. Yeah. I've got set up to save, record, and it drops it directly into a specific Dropbox folder. Yeah. So I can have all my ideas right there. So I'll drop them in there usually. And so those are usually the things I bring in. Either I bring it in and play it for them, or I remind myself on the way to the rehearsal, like, oh yeah, that was a cool idea. Let's flesh that out. If it's more,
you might be playing a guitar or a keyboard or something.
Usually guitar or a keyboard, or maybe just me in the car singing something dumb that I think might work with another thing, and I'll be sure to group those together in like a text file or something so I can get to
By the way, another ninja tip. In Audio Hijack, they have built-in plugins that come with it too, if you don't want to use third-party plugins. And there's one that I discovered recently called Low Boost. And it's very cool. You put it on and it takes the low volume things and just boosts them up. So it's kind of like the low fader of the MV2 plugin from Waves.
That's
where it's great for taking like work tapes or rehearsal things and just making sure everything sounds sort of loud and clear.
The Magic Boost?
Magic Boost.
That's it, yeah. I just upgraded and got that. I haven't checked it out yet, but that's cool.
Okay, so with that guy, you can go into record. Another cool thing about it is it'll record it as an MP3. It's like, not everything we do needs to be 2496 rock stars, right. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Not unless you own a hard drive company.
Because then I can very quickly like grab that out of Finder, drop it into messages, and send it to the guys to say, do you like this at all? And if they respond, yes, this is great. Yeah. We'll do that a lot too. So we'll have some things we've tossed around between getting together. So when we get together, we generally we know we're going to work on something. We have like 2 or 3 things in the works that we're going to work on. Actively. Now,
do you have a nugget of a lyric idea yet at this stage, or do you like to just let it be the music? I mean, I know everything is like, depends on the song. But
it's kind of probably, sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. Generally, if anything, we've had mostly music and maybe an idea for a melody, but then lyric is completely, like we may just sing some nonsense sounds just to find a melody. And occasionally, if we've lived with it long enough, we've come up with some lyrics. But it's usually the thing we're focused on most is getting music done, and then we'll figure out lyrics, which probably makes the songwriters in the room cringe. But you know what? People like your lyrics.
I don't know. I mean, I think everybody does it different, and I think that's the only. I think that everybody's got something that's hard for them to do.
Yeah, 100%.
And so the real question is, how do we push through the stuff that's hard for us to do and get past it? And I think the flip side of that is everybody's probably got some part of it that's easy for them to do. Absolutely. Like, you know, my girlfriend is very word focused. She can just, you can mention a song and she'll just start singing all the lyrics or saying all the lyrics. And I'm like, how do you know all the words to that song, you know? And for me, rhythmic ideas can come easy, although I do tend to play like white guy funky drummer a little too often. But you know, the melodic stuff comes really easy. I can hear melodic lines and harmonies. Might be a little more challenging coming up with really amazing chord progressions, but fortunately you only need to know about 7 chords, rock stars, and you can cover most everything you want to do.
You can cover a lot of ground.
But then lyrics are a big challenge for me. They always have been. Or, you know, or maybe they aren't, and maybe that's the real irony of it all. Maybe it's just we just make lyrics too hard.
I mean, I think lyrics are legit. Like, it's easy to come up with bad lyrics, and it's hard to know when it's like, is that a good lyric or is that just cheesy? And I reject cheesy at every pass if I can. But sometimes you just can't help it. Or you don't know, and you need. That's what's been fun about having people in the room is we can all be like, yeah, that's dumb. Whereas when you're writing,
sometimes you
yourself,
just want to write an actual hit.
Exactly. Heaven forbid. Yeah.
Do you ever feel like the time that you've spent watching YouTube videos, trying out mix tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes has gotten you nowhere? Have you been looking for a simple, straightforward, step-by-step process for creating a pro mix that won't take you years to learn? What if you could have a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all your mixing struggles and could coach you through them? If you struggle with any of these questions, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is just for you. Now you can discover the proven step-by-step mix system from Grammy-winning mixer Craig Alvin for consistently creating a pro-quality mix from your home studio that will sound amazing everywhere. Listen to this quote from one of our students, David. Quote, "Absolutely the most informative and helpful block of information and mentoring on the mix process that I've ever been a part of. That was like sitting behind a mix engineer for years, watching and picking up tips along the way, but condensed into a 6 to 7 hour session." Close quote. Look, I'm so confident that this will take your mixes to the next level that if you can't get a killer mix within 30 days, I'll give you a full refund, no questions asked. So if you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then go to ultimatemixingmasterclass.com and start now by checking out the free preview of the Ultimate Snare Mixing Trick. And I'll see you at the front row table of the Grammys. Cheers. Okay, so then do you find that it's helpful to have a notebook? Are you like a poetry kind of guy or writing prose, or do you do lyric writing exercises ever? I'm guessing you've explored a lot of those ideas.
Yeah, the biggest for me is I enjoy journaling just in general, whether it's on paper or in like a text file. So I've just gotten really good. I mean, I do a lot of writing for what I do with Home Studio Corner and whatnot. But in addition to that, I like to it's just my way of kind of processing and relaxing. So there's rarely a day goes by that I'm not writing something. Now, it's not poetry. It's not all beautiful. It's like, boy, I'm really mad at the cat today kind of stuff. But, which by the way, if you'd like a cat, I've got one. You can.
I like that song. Boy, I'm really mad at the cat.
Boy, today. I'm really mad at that cat. But so it's not like I have like these lyric ideas just flow out of it, but general themes kind of, or even just more emotions come out of that I can then kind of use as at least like kind of base material to start thinking about lyrics. So if I'm in processing something, it'll bring up some feelings and maybe a lyric or two comes out from writing about that. But if nothing else, it just gives me kind of a headspace and I can go reread that and be like, oh, that I was feeling, because music's emotion, right? We're trying to convey an emotion in some way. So if I can review like stuff I've written over the last couple of weeks, a lot of times it'll put me in an emotional state that is maybe more conducive to writing something meaningful.
Do you find a useful place to write things down? Do you like to use, pencil in a notebook, or do you find that digital notebooks are helpful? I love the digital stuff, but sometimes I find like, I also feel like digital is the easiest way to just hide something,
Yeah, because, hang on one second.
Go ahead.
I'm literally stuck. I don't know how this happened.
It's pure excitement.
Man found strangled with headphone cable. What was the question?
Sometimes I feel like digital is the best way to hide stuff and never see it again.
Well, yeah, because it's infinite, so then you can save something and it goes away forever. And you can get to it, but you never actually do. So I'm in a constant state of trying to figure out if I'm going to be a digital or an analog guy, constantly wringing my hands over it. So from one day to the next, but I enjoy both, but I do writing it on paper does just being away from a screen, because there's 1,000 things to distract me when I'm on a screen.
Yeah.
It's a little harder to be distracted on paper, even though I'll sometimes have my phone in one hand and pen in the other. But
Yeah.
I probably would prefer just being on paper. And I might scan it and save it into like my digital system afterward, because that's handy. And sometimes I do write on screen, because sometimes that feels right. Like I feel like Doogie Howser at the end credit scene where he's typing into his old computer, and I'm like, yeah, I'm Doogie. I'm keeping my journal and typing some song ideas. The problem is if you record something, then it's like, okay, where do I keep that MP3, and how do I link it to that piece of paper or whatever? So having a digital system helps. With the last album, the Staredown thing we did, I was on a big Apple Notes kick at the time. So I created a shared Apple Notes folder that we all had access to. And so it had notes with lyric ideas, and anybody could add ideas to that folder, including all the MP3s that we recorded during the
right, because in an Apple Note, you can put a photo, a video, a audio.
Yep, you can drop an audio in there and play it right inside of it. And it's handy. Like you can't really get it out of there easily. So you're kind of locked into the Apple world. But you could do the same with just a shared Dropbox folder or something like that. But
Samply is another cool tool for that.
Samply.
So, yeah, if you're not checking that out, you should definitely check it out. SAMPLY and .app. And it's an online music cloud folder service that, for example, you can create a project, you can upload cool. your tracks there, whether they're high res or MP3, and they'll play back that way. So it plays back as high quality as you want.
That's cool.
You can send that link to somebody easily. They can comment on it. You can also send a link that lets anybody, even if they don't have control of the project, just upload their files to it. So you can collect things that way from everybody.
That's cool. It's a
very handy one. And then Rockstars, of course, they've been a sponsor on the podcast. And if you're curious, I definitely suggest you go check it out and go at least sign up for the free version. And then when you're ready to upgrade to the pro version, just use the coupon RSR20, and that'll give you 20% off. So it's a very cool tool.
I remember you telling me about it. The free version is like generous too.
Yeah.
Like it's not looking at the list.
Remember your experience with Dropbox. You just, everybody started out on the free Dropbox for a while. And then you're like,
it's not one of those.
You're like, oh, I'm ready for the next level.
It's not one of those, it's so limited, it's useless. Like they give you 25 gigs on the free level.
Yeah, it's awesome.
And you're not limited to the number of projects. That's cool. All right, I'm going to check that out.
Cool. But keeping track of stuff is one of the big challenges.
Yeah.
I guess it was always a challenge, even in the analog world. But at least in the analog world, you probably had, your most current notebook or something that you just had to keep track of. And your cassettes lived in your car anyway.
And you didn't have this sense that you had to have everything available on your person on a phone device.
Flash.
Like you knew
you didn't
that
have to share it in the moment.
I knew everything would be in the studio on that piece of tape versus, oh, it's in the cloud, I can get to it. Sometimes, man, just because we can, I don't know if we should.
Yeah. What are some things that you've learned to break through writer's block for lyrics yourself? And then what are some things that you've learned from others and just, you talk about on your channels and stuff? How have you learned to help your audience deal with writer's block and just kind of moving forward, just getting over that?
Good question. I think to repeat myself, the journaling thing for me has been really helpful, because I think some people try to start from a completely blank slate, and it's just, there's this business guy I've followed who talks about like never start anything from scratch. Like you should always have some stuff in the works. So when you sit down to do like you didn't sit down to do this podcast with no idea of what we were going to talk about. Like at least you had a few directions you wanted to go, so you weren't starting from scratch. Same with songwriting. If you start with literally a blank sheet of paper and you have no ideas, that can be overwhelming. I've started doing this thing with my like video content, because I'm doing so much, I have to kind of keep track of everything. But to sit down, to come up with an idea for a video and then plan it, script it out, and then shoot it and then edit it, that's a lot of things to happen at once. Not impossible. It's just, that first part takes a lot of headspace, and then you're kind of exhausted for the second part. So we've started doing this, come up with ideas separate from shooting them. So ideas and this on this day, map it out, script it on this day, and then maybe shoot the video on the third day. And
that's smart.
We're just starting to kind of play with that, but it makes a lot of sense, because now I can come in when it's a video shoot day. I know I've already got it scripted out. It's just sitting there waiting for me to just do the thing. way easier than coming in and saying, all right, I have to come up with a brilliant idea again, because that gets exhausting. So there's a lot of corollaries there to songwriting, like just collect ideas. And somebody says something interesting in a text message, maybe screenshot it and throw it into whatever your folder is. Or I like to listen to kind of slower, like singer-songwriter-y stuff when I'm starting to get into songwriting mood, because I can listen to Foo Fighters all day, but I don't really know what any of the songs say. I mean, I know what they say, but I don't really care. But like,
you're my hero, man.
Exactly. Thank you. I knew it was about me. Yeah, I think listening and paying attention to what lyrics are out there, even like songs that I know and love. And then reading fiction too. I don't do it enough, but reading how someone else wrote and described something and did dialogue or told a story. Like, I don't do a lot of story songs. I wish I did. But even just that puts me in like a different creative space than if I've not been consuming something, someone else's art. So for me, that's probably fiction and music, or movies. I love movies. I went and saw one of the new Marvel movies last night. And it's like, I feel a little more creative today because I was kind of in that space. But anyway.
Yeah. The art museum is another cool place. So in St. Louis is an incredible art museum. And I've experienced that where you just go and just stand in front of paintings and you're like, just start, writing the story of the painting, the colors, the images, and stuff like that. And you can come up with some great ideas there too. But it's tricky, and it's like, I've got do you know Shel Silverstein, Where the Sidewalk Ends? The Sarah Cynthia Sylvia Stout, Who Would Not Take the Garbage Out, was one of the poems from this is going back to the 70s, Joe, so sorry about that. But in this one, like, she's overwhelmed with the garbage. She just wouldn't take it out. And then it reaches to the sky and everything. It just becomes insane. Sometimes I feel that way about my folder full of, great little clips and quotes. Like, I've been pasting everything in for years now. And then, again, it's like making that time and taking the process to go back into it and extract ideas and do things. But I think one of the, two thoughts come to mind. One is, since it's easy for me to press record and voice memo and pick up a guitar and sketch ideas, that's the easy part for me. Maybe that's easy for you rock stars, or maybe you've got a different part that's easy. But I think it's like finding ways to just press record and go sing some of those different little lines over things, and just call them sketches. Don't commit to anything. I think finding ways to do that could be helpful for me. I know that for me personally, when I'm listening in the car, and we were talking about this, I think with Reed Shippen, was this idea of being distracted. Like, concentrating is one of the worst ways to be creative sometimes, Being distracted is a good way to let things just come out naturally from the subconscious. And in the car, I can listen to music and lyrics can just come to me. There's something about this creative adventure going on in my head. But the challenge is I'm listening to the song on my phone. I just came up with the lyric idea. I don't have anything left to record on. So I'm always thinking, like, I need to carry a second phone or something in the car. Just get one of those old little voice memo things.
To overdub yourself.
Just to overdub the ideas, Otherwise, how do you do it?
That's the next big thing. That's the next.
Yeah. I mean, I've even tried loading all the sketches into GarageBand on the phone so that I could record along with it. And then you start like having a near accident. You're like, okay, stop doing that when you're driving.
That's how you're going to go, Lidge.
Yeah. Well, what about you? What are some, like, how do you go from busy Joe to creative Joe?
I mean, a lot of when I'm feeling the most on creatively is when I've scheduled it, as much as that goes against all like, you and I wouldn't just get together randomly to do a podcast, right? We had to get it on the calendar, even though we both like it and we want to be here, but you have to actually commit to it. So part of it's that, just getting some songwriting time on my calendar, which is it's harder to do with other people, like when I'm writing with the band, but then that's guarantees something's going to happen that Saturday at 3 p.m. or whatever. That's a piece of it. And then back to you talking about singing over kind of the sketches, I love, like, if you can get the freedom to just sing stupid stuff, Just be silly, either scat over it or just sing whatever comes naturally, like in the moment. I've had so many lyrics just kind of come to me while just singing over a chord progression. And I'm fishing for a melody, but then a phrase comes out. And
do you like to get up and walk around while you do it, or do you find that you're better sitting and holding the guitar?
Usually well, it depends. Sometimes it happens when I'm listening to like the sketches on a drive. Yeah. And I'm just singing along to it and something ridiculous comes out and I just kind of keep singing that over and over and then record that later or write it down or something. But yeah, there's been several times where like the whole direction of a song lyrically comes from some nonsense I was singing while listening to the music part. And then that, once I have because I think the main idea of where we want it to go is probably one of the bigger hurdles to get over. Like what are we saying in this song at all? But it's like once you get at one of those, like the first line of the verse or the last line of the chorus, you can at least start to like build from there. Like, okay, what can rhyme, all those questions. What can rhyme with that? How many syllables is it? What else? What's the rhyme structure?
Once you like, we're good at following directions. And a lot of this is like just taking the time to give ourselves some directions.
It's like my buddy Tim, my drummer, says he played on a session with pretty well-known producer, and he was all excited to work with this guy, and he says, okay, what do you want me to do on the drums on this song? And he goes, I don't know, you're the drummer, you figure it out. And it was like, what? It's like, we want direction. Like, no, we don't want you to stifle us and put us into a box where we can't be creative at all. But we also, like, when I lead like the band, like at church or whatever, I can't just be like, what do you guys want to do? What do you think? Like, a part of me needs to be like, hey, why don't you play this? Why don't you not play on this part? Why don't you come in here? Let's try halftime on the drums. Like, and then they all feed off of it and they do creative, great stuff. But it's kind of this, we all want to be led and we need something to build off of. And that, for songwriting at least, that's super handy to have something, like I said, to not start from a blank slate, to have something to build off of.
Yeah. This podcast is proud to present Recording Studio Rockstars Academy. Are you ready to take your recording, mixing, and mastering to the next level and make your best record ever? Then visit the Academy to find the course that's right for you. Want to record killer drums in your home studio? Then check out Rockstars of Drums to learn how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with a professional Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Or if you're ready to start mastering your own records at home, then check out Rockstars of Mastering, where I walk you through exactly how I master my own records using nothing but plugins. Plus, I take you into a world-class mastering studio, Sterling Sound, to meet with Ryan Smith and hear how he professionally mastered my record, Skadoosh, for release to streaming platforms. That's the music you hear on this podcast, Rockstars. And if mixing is your focus, then check out my free mixing course, Mix Master Bundle, where I show you how to mix using stock and free plugins and Pro Tools. Plus, you get a look at how I recorded everything in my studio and multi-track downloads for you to practice mixing and even upload to your website if you want. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to recordingstudiorockstars.com/academy to get started now. Let me jump to the far other end of that equation.
Okay.
You've made records. Yep. You've got stuff that you've already recorded. What are some of the things that are challenging about re-promoting older records and keeping the listens growing? What have you learned about that?
I'm probably the worst person to ask about this. I mostly make my music for myself. Like I say, like I want to make music so I can hear myself singing the truth back to myself on days when I don't believe it. So that's it's a completely self-serving reason. It's fulfilling for me just to make it. And for me, obviously a big part of it is then all that new music gets to be featured in different forms on the different videos and things that I make. So I might do a video on a cool vocal effect. And in doing that video, I'm using one of the songs from the new EP. And then people say, hey, what's that new EP? And I say, it's this, go listen to it. So that's kind of my own little way to build a little bit of an awareness around it. But I'm also I'm not super interested in it getting tons of listens, if that makes, it's not, I know people say that.
That's not your goal. Dumb. That's not the goalpost to measure. In other words.
I want to make it. I honestly never check those stats. I log into my DistroKid to download a couple $100, every quarter, get my, all right, cool, got some beer money. But It's never been my goal in that sense. I'm more interested in creating a body of work. And if somebody gets into it and then they dive deep and they listen to all of it, that's great. If it gets picked up and I get millions of downloads, that's great too. But I'm content with the music I make for my own reasons.
Yeah. Well, I think that probably is true for me and probably true for a lot of our listeners too. And when you just love making music, you just want to be able to make it and then, be able to keep making it. And it is fun to have your music released. I just started doing it last year, really as a solo artist. And it's fun to be able to actually send a link to somebody now.
Yeah.
It's like so people can actually discover what the hell I do.
It's like the love-hate relationship with like Kickstarter. Like I don't dislike Kickstarter, but that whole like, it's almost, you get like update number 48 from the Kickstarter that you backed for an album. And it's like, it's almost here. It's almost here. And like, by the time it's here, you're like, I just don't care anymore.
Right.
Because I'd much rather it just be out and share it with me. But then also thinking like the music piece is just like a small piece of the puzzle, right? Like if I get people to listen to my music because I do all this other stuff. And then they happen to a few of them listen to my music. But if I just made music and didn't have any other thing out there online, it would just be that much harder to have anybody listen to it. And I think a lot of people want to say, can I just make good music? And it's like, well, you can, but you're going to have to be out there in lots of other ways.
Yeah,
like I'm sure your Skadoosh record gets a lot more views because of this podcast versus if you didn't have a podcast, right?
Yeah, for sure. And
which is delightful, by the way.
The song I did with my daughter, Spring is an amazing thing. I re-promote it on the first day of spring every time. And it's fun to just keep putting it out there. And, it's like, sure, I don't want to spend all day worrying about, listen numbers on Spotify's and social media, likes and all that kind of stuff. But it is fun to make music and then share it with people because, music making is a lot to do with communicating with friends, in my experience. Absolutely. So it's fun to be able to do that. So in the interest of finishing close to on time here, Joe, let me ask you this one last question because you've got some big changes coming on over there. You are now by the time this comes out, it will have been gone for a bit. But tell us about what's going on with Recording Revolution, what that is, and maybe where you're headed.
Yeah. So if you're not familiar, so I started Home Studio Corner in 2009, and then this guy from Tampa named Graham Cochran started the Recording Revolution around the same time, a little bit after. And we met each other pretty quickly, became friends, and we did a bunch of things together. We did some in-person events. We did a podcast. We did
dueling mixes.
We did dueling mixes for like 7 years.
Classic.
So we did a lot of things together. He's a great guy, great friend. And he just saw tremendous success with the Recording Revolution and just started to teach people business and kind of got into doing that. And that became kind of his new passion. So he started to move away from Recording Revolution. Anyway, he brought in, for the last couple of years, he brought in a few different people to make content, and just they couldn't ever quite figure out that piece of if he steps away, what happens to it. Because I think people are just getting burnt out doing stuff for it. And so I reached out to him at the end of last year just to say, hey, what's going on? Let's do something together. Recording Revolution, Home Studio Corner. And he was saying, yeah, I'm actually going to shut it down because I'm loving this new thing I'm doing. We haven't just kind of figured out the content thing. It'd been like 4 months since they posted a video. So it was kind of starting to wind down. And I said, well, have you thought about selling it or letting somebody else take over it? And so that started a conversation and where I'm essentially taking over the Recording Revolution. So
right on. Yeah.
So it's if you're not familiar, Graham's got a very similar approach to music and recording than like I do. And he's done a wonderful job. Like he's crushed it over there, and he's moved on. So I wanted to kind of step in and take care of that audience as well. So
now it's kind of the home studio revolution.
The Cornerlution. Cornerlution. So yeah, we're still, by the time this airs, we will hopefully have figured things out a little bit more, but we're kind of just dipping our toe in the water to I don't want to come in and change a bunch of stuff, and I want to make friends with that audience because I don't know them as well. Some of them know me, some of them don't. So but it's just content, right? I'm just helping people make music and
Yep.
Just
It's
putting
awesome
content
stuff.
on more on that channel as well as mine. That's really the game.
So Rockstars, definitely go, if you haven't already checked out Joe's, his work on YouTube, definitely go check that out. So Home Studio Corner and Recording Revolution. I believe you're also should be findable on the PreSonus channel as well.
Yeah.
You've just created so much helpful stuff out there. And you also have some free resources that people can go check out right now. What are some of your favorites? Anything you want to recommend to the rock stars that would help them make their next record?
Yeah, my favorite. It's a couple years old now, but it's still one of my favorite things. It's a free, simple little guide called the 5-Step Mix Guide. I remember years ago I told Bjorgman, I was like, you can't put steps on things. And then here I am a few years later, like, oh, actually, because what happened is I mixed hundreds and hundreds of songs and started to realize, hey, I kind of follow this same process every time that I've kind of developed. I didn't realize it, but then as I kind of analyze the way I work, I always go through these 5 steps. So I kind of bundled that into like a free PDF to kind of teach that. And that's also what I teach in my mixing course, kind of expanded. But it's really simple. It's easy to understand. It's one of those, you read it and you're like, can it be that simple? But then you go try it and it really does. Like, because I think the problem is people at this stage in 2023, we've got endless amounts of information, so it's hard to sift through and know, okay, this guy says to do this guy says to do that, which do I do? And it's difficult, right? Kind of like if you want to learn how to like lose weight or get in shape, you can just spend the next 3 years learning 18,000 best ways to do that, right? So this is just a way to kind of say, here's a simple approach, try it. And then just try it on a mix and you'll see it. It actually works really well.
Awesome.
And that's at 5stepmix.com.
5stepmix.com. Okay. So Rockstars, definitely check that out. We'll include a link to that in the show notes as well. Well, I don't know. Let me go to the closing question here. We've asked you this before, but we'll ask it again. It's our hypothetical question where we take the Wayback Studio machine. You go back in time and you find young Joe and you say, listen, young Joe. Hey, Joe. Listen to me, dude. That was my little best Jimi Hendrix.
That's good.
Here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself one day. What advice would you go back and give yourself now that you've had all this experience, if you could go back and give yourself that advice?
I would say you don't have to do everything yourself. And things tend to work better with other people and in community. I love the idea of like, I'm an introvert. I love, like I told you, I went to the movies last night by myself. Some people find that appalling and I love it. Like I just enjoy time alone, but that carries over into work, both music and business. I found that with both, things tend to just go better when there's more people involved than if it's just a one-trick pony, me doing everything kind of a show. So musically, that's more obvious. Like if I play drums, it's terrible. If I program drums, it's not much better. But if I get Tim, who toured with Keith Urban, to play drums, suddenly I've got some killer drums and everything is elevated. So yeah, that's a small example of, but both in life and in business, I feel like better together has been this theme popping up lately that I wish I embraced more. At some point, I feel like I kind of went off on my own and I wished I had kind of
There's a lot of power in being self-sufficient.
Sure.
But there's also a lot of power in collaborating. I mean, I feel like the best work I've done has always been collaborations.
Which is hard for the ego on some level. Like, oh, I did it by myself and it was okay. Then I did it. Like dueling mixes was one of the biggest things I've done kind of as far as like a single product thing created, but it was with Graham. And so like, there's that ego hit of like, if I'd done it myself, but anyway, so yeah, it's a journey. But that's probably the thing I would tell myself.
My solution for that is I think I'd just like to take credit for everybody else's work all the time. And
that works
that keeps
too.
My ego inflated no matter what we do. But, hearing you talk about doing stuff yourself versus bringing in great musicians, I'm doing some of both. And there are some things that are easier by myself, but they tend to be rough sketches of ideas. And then, fleshing out a really great version of it is easier with a bunch of other musicians.
Yeah.
And I like doing a little bit of all of it. It's really a fun way to work.
I think for me, I have a very all or nothing personality. So it doesn't have to be all collaboration and nothing by yourself. But I think just finding a good balance of making sure I'm not doing everything all by myself all the time is a good, healthy place for me to be.
Well, Joe, it's always a pleasure to hang out with you, dude.
You too.
Thank you so much for hanging with us on Recording Studio Rockstars again. And I know we need to get together in person sometime soon so you can come see the new studio setup and all that.
Yes.
And you need to hear how good your record sounds on my speakers.
I have no idea how good it sounds, so...
Sounds real good. Rockstars, please do click through on the show notes and go listen to Joe's music there. And then we'll, of course, have the 5 steps to a great mix. I forgot exactly what the title was, but that'll be in the show notes there as well. And Joe, thanks for hanging, man. I look forward to seeing you in person.
Lids, you're the best.
All right, man. Cheers. Talk soon. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our awesome sponsors who help make this episode possible: Lewitt, Atom Audio, Native Instruments, Isotope, Spectra 1964, and OWC. And remember, at isotope.com and nativeinstruments.com, use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off any plugin purchase. If you enjoyed Recording Studio Rockstars, please check out our sponsors using the links in our show notes, because it's a great way to help support this show. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars: Vlad Weselchenko, Braden Stremming, Liz Hulitskaya, and Roberto Oxman de Aragao for additional podcasts and video help. Thanks so much for listening, Rockstars, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.